Welcome to Tuesday morning's class, the 16th of March 2021. Our humble attempt to maintain a Bhagavatam class in Dublin. We have, as I said previously, the class by Sanatan Goswami, Sanatan Govinda on Monday morning, and I am trying to maintain a Tuesday morning class as well. The ultimate aim is that we will always have Bhagavatam in Dublin 7 days a week. Well, Chaitanya Charitamrita on Sunday, perhaps. But that is the goal, to continue to do that. So this is, again, it's just starting small, start where we can, and hopefully there will be a listenership. But ultimately, hopefully we will be able to have live classes in temples or wherever, just so long as we keep the process going, because the Bhagavatam is like the center of our lives as devotees of Srila Prabhupada, devotees of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. And as the more I read Bhagavatam, the more I see why that is. Because it is introducing a whole culture into society. So, first of all, I would like to apologize for not having my tea light on this morning, because I ran out of one pack and I left my other pack somewhere else. So I hope you can forgive me for that. So I'd like to continue on the first canto. We're in the first canto, chapter 12, verse number 18, and it is simultaneously going on in viṣṇu-rāta at the moment. So I will start. Sri Rajuvacha apyese viṣṇu-rājarsin punya shlokan mahatmana anuvartita svidya shasa sadhu vadena satamaha. Sri Raja, the old good king Maharaj Yudhishthir, Uvacha said, Api, whether, Aisha, this, Vangshang, family, Raja Rishin of saintly kings, Punya Shloka, pious by the very name. Interesting. Maha-atmana, all great souls, Anuvartata, follower, Svit, will it be, Yashasa, by achievements, Sadhu Vadena, by glorification, Sattama, O great souls. And a translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The good King Yudhishthir inquired, O great souls, will he become as saintly a king, as pious in his very name, and as famous and glorified in his achievements as others who appeared in this great royal family? Purport. The fathers of King Yudhishthir were all great saintly kings, pious and glorified by their achievements. They were all saints on the royal throne, and therefore all the members of the state were happy, pious, well-behaved, prosperous, and spiritually enlightened. Under strict guidance of the great souls and spiritual injunctions, such great saintly kings were trained up, and as a result, the kingdom was full of saintly persons and was a happy land of spiritual life. Maharaj Yudhishthir was himself a replica of his ancestors, and he desired that the next king after him become exactly like his great forefathers. He was happy to learn from the learned Brahmanas that by astrological calculations the child would be born a first-grade devotee of the Lord. And more confidentially, he wanted to know whether the child was going to follow in the footsteps of his great forefathers. That is the way of the monarchical state. The reigning king should be a pious, chivalrous devotee of the Lord, and fear personified for the upstarts. He must also leave an heir apparent, equally qualified to rule over the innocent citizens. In the modern setup of the democratic states, the people themselves are fallen to the qualities of Sudras or less, and the government is run by the representative who is ignorant of the spiritual mode of administrative education. Thus the whole atmosphere is surcharged with Shudra qualities, manifested by lust and avarice. Such administrators quarrel every day among themselves. The cabinet of ministers changes often due to party and group selfishness. Everyone wants to exploit the state resources till he dies. No one retires from political life unless forced to do so. How can such low-grade men do good to the people? The result is corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. They should learn from the Srimad-Bhagavatam how ideal the administrators must be before they can be given charge of different posts. Amagina timirandasya jana jana shalakaya chakshuran militam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupatakamayam Tadati Svabatantikam Vanchikalpatarubhyascha Kripasinduevacha Patitanam Pavanebo Vaishnavevo Namo Namaha. We're still in the section in the Bhagavatam 112:18. It's the birth of Emperor Parikshit. In this, Parikshit, of course, is a very important king because he is the person who asks the questions in the Bhagavatam, and he's given the answers by Shukadeva Goswami. He's very, very important because he appeared at the beginning of Kali Yuga, and the questions he asks are of interest to everybody, especially for those who are about to die, which is us all. You have to remember, this is the time when Krishna is leaving the planet, and he leaves after him this Bhagavatam for the souls in Kali Yuga to take up spiritual life. So we are that category. So we have to understand as much as we can what or who Maharaj Parikshit is and what he represents. The questions that he asks are, of course, are very, very relevant. And at this point, his grandfather is being quoted, who is Yudhishthira. His grandfather is the grandsire of the Yudhishthira is trying to find out who Maharaj Parikshit is himself, and he's asking the sages and the saints and the astrologers present, what sort of person will this Maharaj Parikshit be? But there is no problem. Who Maharaj Parikshit is, he's going to be a typical king in his line, in Yudhishthira's line. He'll be the most pious person. And I think in the previous verse, such first grade devotees of the Lord are perfect in all respects. And Maharaj Parikshit is a mahā-bhāgavat, and he took birth in the family of Maharaj Yudhishthira. He's addressed as a mahā-bhāgavat, or the greatest of the fortunates. So Yudhishthira doesn't have to worry too much because Maharaj Parikshit is going to be an absolutely, totally ideal king. And it's given there that that was a great worry of these kings, because not only had they to rule really nicely in their kingdom, but they also had to make sure that the next heir would do the same thing. So this is like the disciplic succession almost. They wanted to make sure that the proper rulership would go on. So this is a, something which affects everything, every aspect in life, and that is the progenitor, or the how a thing will go on after one's life is there. Because we're in very, very short lives now. These devotees lived longer lives, but in general, even if we make some progress, we have to move on. So we have to depend on the next generation to do the thing nicely. So that is why evam parampara paraptam imam rajarshe ovadu. So kalaneha mahata yoga brashta parantaba. So the saintly kings understood in this way that the cyclic succession is of extreme importance. Even the ways in which education is given today, how doctors become doctors, lawyers take on the next lawyership, how governments go on. I mean, it is all to do with trying to maintain, we have this maintaining capitalism or democracy, we must do this. These are the things which people who are in positions, they worry about. They want to make sure that what they have done up until this point is going to be continued when they leave. And they cannot guarantee that because of so many factors. And here we see that at this point, 5,000 years ago, Maharaj Yudhishthira was bequeathing the rulership to a grand nephew, Maharaj Parikshit, and he wanted it to be proper. He wanted it to go on properly, and this is where we have, you could say, it's a difficulty. He's worried that it won't go on properly, and he's asking the sages, will it happen? And you have to remember, at this point, Krishna intervened. Paritranaya sadhanam vinishaya satushkatam. And that Krishna appears when there is a disturbance in the proper rulership of the world. That's what he does. He comes when this is happening. And he has just appeared. And he has reinstated Maharaj Yudhishthira in the throne. Maharaj Yudhishthira even made the point, he said, I'm not fit to be here. What was wrong? Like, just because of my lust and greed to be the ruler, so many millions of people have died. So Maharaj Yudhishthira was thinking in that way. But that wasn't the case. Krishna wanted to change the rulership because Duryodhana was representing a demoniac state of life. And so therefore, all the reasons why Krishna has set up this planet would have been disturbed. He set up this planet the way it is so that we can enact our nonsense here, our material desires, but ultimately so that we will actually leave this place and go back to the spiritual dimension. So we can't get too comfortable here, as we know. We can't anyway, because it's not a comfortable place, and it's a place of suffering. Sometimes you might get some happiness, but then it's inevitably followed by distress, unless, of course, we experience some spiritual happiness, and that is the nature of spiritual life. Spiritual life is anandam buddhi vardhanam. It is always increasing. That's when you know that you're on a spiritual platform. It's when the spiritual life increases. But then again, Krishna only will give us a taste of that from time to time. He will lift the veil and will allow us to experience spiritual life. But unless we're absolutely purified, Krishna will again continue to purify us and to test us while in this material world. So Krishna had just intervened at this time, and he wanted Maharaj Yudhishthira on the throne, and he convinced Maharaj Yudhishthira that this was the right situation, because Maharaj Yudhishthira was still not convinced. He was a very humble ruler. But eventually Krishna brought him to Bhishma, and Bhishma then explained to Yudhishthira that, no, this is the plan of the Lord. You are meant to be here, and this is for the good of all society. So what we have in this purport is Maharaj Yudhishthira wanting the society to go on. And so Prabhupada in the purport explains that the forefathers of Yudhishthira were all great saintly kings, pious and glorified by their great achievements. So does that mean that they were very proud? No. They were all saints of the royal throne. And therefore all the members of the state, and this is very important, were happy, pious, well-behaved, prosperous, and spiritually enlightened. And then why was that? Under strict guidance of the great souls, that's the Brahmanas, and spiritual injunctions, the Shastra, such great saintly kings were trained up. So it was a training they got. And as a result, the kingdom was full of saintly persons and was a happy land of spiritual life. So, such great saintly kings were trained up, and as a result, the kingdom was full of saintly persons and was a happy land of spiritual life. So that is what Krishna wanted. That is what Krishna still wants. He empowered A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada against all the odds. At a later stage in his life, Parishori was giving a talk the other day, and he explained that Prabhupada was, from 65 onwards, his health had it was just on decline. And yet that was the time when he enacted superhuman activities to spread this movement all over the world. He stopped sleeping so that he could write the purports on the Bhagavatam. So what type of determination is that? And what type of compassion is that? It is the same compassion of Maharaj Yudhishthira, same compassion of Maharaj Parikshit. He's giving to us these great saints because, as I said at the beginning, he's trying to re-establish the culture of spiritual life. He's giving some indications where it is now, and then he gives indications. Sorry, I put that slightly differently. He's giving very clear instructions how it should be, but Prabhupada is also very realistic, and then he explains how it is at present. So if anyone wants to take up the mantle of following Srila Prabhupada, this purport actually explains how to do it, or it explains how we should act and how we should think. Then it's up to whoever takes the instruction from Srila Prabhupada, the Vani, to go ahead and do it. It's not for the faint-hearted. It is, Prabhupada was not faint-hearted. He was extremely happy, pure devotee. But from a materialistic point of view, he took on huge austerity. Austerity, we should say. So let's just go on with a little bit with the purport and see how Prabhupada develops it. So that is what's needed. The members of the state were happy, pious, well-behaved, prosperous, and spiritually enlightened, and under strict guidance of great souls and spiritual injunctions, such saintly kings were trained up, and as a result, the kingdom was full of saintly persons and was a happy land of spiritual life. I was talking to one person yesterday who came to the temple. One of our brahmataris was out doing some preaching, and he brought this person back to the temple. And the person was telling us how his grandfather and his father were both used to pray a lot to God and were very humble people. And he feels that he had got that energy from them. So that was my experience too as well growing up. There were some very pious people that I grew up a lot around. I mean, they had maybe not in the whole Vedic sense they were qualified, but they definitely had a spiritual dimension, and they understood that spiritual dimension was the most important dimension that they had. I personally have an understanding example of 3 people in that. So I was very happy to hear that it's still there, because it is that dimension, I think, has gradually been lost. I mean, I would hope that it's not been completely lost, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. But whatever the case is, Prabhupada wanted us to reintroduce that into society today. So Maharaj Yudhishthira was a replica of his ancestors, and he desired that the next king after him become exactly like his great forefathers. He was happy to learn from the learned Brahmanas that by astrological calculations, the child would be born a first-grade devotee of the Lord, and more confidentially, he wanted to know whether the child was going to follow in the footsteps of his great forefathers. Now, I was looking at a few verses back where it was explained about how to create proper progeny, and Prabhupada talked about the Garbhadan purificatory process, and there are certain other samskaras like Simantanaya and Sadabhakshanam during the period of pregnancy. When the child is born, the first purificatory process is, and then when the child is born, there's the Jata Karma. So this civilization was very, very focused on how to bring up children and how to ensure that the next group of people were pious, and they were lovers of God. They were believers of God, and they related with God. They took their refuge in God. So are we doing that ourselves? That's the question. And maybe not even worry about it, but anybody else? Are we doing that? This is what Maharaj Yudhishthira wants us to become, exemplars, just like he wanted his grandson to be like that. So Prabhupada wanted us to be like that as well. To be very good examples of how to live. So further on, Prabhupada says, that is the way of the monarchical state. The reigning king should be pious, chivalrous devotee of the Lord, and this is a very important point, and fear personified for the upstarts. These people take their position very seriously. They're fear personified. And how can they be fear personified? Because they're taking shelter of Krishna, who is fear personified. They're not taking credit themselves, but they're taking credit in their surrender to Krishna, and therefore they can represent Krishna. So we don't have to become, although at the time it was a normal, natural progression that these people were great kshatriyas, big rulers, very built in that way as well. They had their physiognomy was very relevant to their ability. But whereas you could take Srila Prabhupada, who was a very small person by physical stature, but he had humongous fearlessness and power and strength. And of course, Prabhupada is mentioning about the monarchical system, and we understand how the monarchs in Europe were in charge for a long time, and then they were replaced by the merchants, the so-called aristocracy. I don't know how you present them, but definitely the monarchy were in charge, and they had this divine right of kings. But they were, in general, quite selfish, and they weren't necessarily being dictated to by the saintly Brahmanical class. Although definitely that system was in evidence at the time. it was definitely there. And we can just look at the English monarchy. Of course, there's so much talk about the monarchy today, which I won't even get into. But the whole idea of monarchy was that the king was divinely inspired and divinely educated by the higher class, the priestly class, because the priestly class had the contact with spirituality. They had all the qualities of the brahmanas, titikshava, karunika, all this piety, non-violence, ability to forgiveness. All of these different things were there. So therefore, they were being trained properly by these people, and so that was the monarchical system. But now Prabhupada goes on to the second part. In the modern setup of the democratic states, the people themselves are fallen to the qualities of Shudras or less, and the government is run by the representative who is ignorant of the scriptural mode of administrative education. So that says it all. So even our famous De Valera, taking shelter of Charles McQuaid, who was by all accounts quite a errant individual himself. I won't make any comment because I don't really know the man. I never even studied what he said, but he wasn't that well liked, and it was that the church had control over the state. Whether he was was it transparent via media, it leaves something to be concerned. But at least the ruler was taking shelter there, which was a good thing. Like even today, though, we have the examples of the ayatollahs and those sort of characters, people taking shelter of them being the brahmanas and the pious people. It's kind of not unusual that people find this kind of rulership a little threatening. But it's there anyway. You find it in communism as well. I mean, there is the Communist Party in China who seem to... I'm not making massive political statements here, by the way, but I'm just trying to give examples. They say, oh no, we can't take shelter of any of these people, but they are taking shelter of, intellectuals, Communist Party, whatever, who are kind of ruling using other methods like the so-called Bible of Mao at one point, or Stalinist, Leninist, whatever. It's the same thing. They are taking shelter of scripture, Marx and whatever, and they are trying to implement a system, but the system is flawed. So that doesn't mean to say that every system is flawed. But what is there in its place is the democratic system, whereby non-qualified people will in turn put in other non-qualified people, and therefore you'll have havoc as well. Like at the moment, the education system has just got rid of religion completely. We had religious education when we were growing up in school. It was quite tame, to be honest with you, but it was there nonetheless. And then the fallout from this is that there's the scriptural mode of administrative education is lost. There's the whole atmosphere is surcharged with Shudra qualities, manifested by lust and avarice. So we have the whole, the society as it's being lived today, with the capitalistic society, with a few people on top making tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of an artificial form of currency, tons of money, and are making decisions based on that. So that's the lust and avarice. Such administrators quarrel every day among themselves. You just have to look at the different parliaments which are live these days and to see what goes on there. The cabinet of ministers changes often due to party and group selfishness, purges in parties, as we know. Everyone wants to exploit the state resources till he dies. There may be some people who have more noble aims, but it's very covered over. No one retires from political life unless forced to do so. And how can such low-grade men do good to the people? They certainly can't give spiritual education to the people, and they give so-called material education, but it's based in a very flawed system. So the result is corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. Corruption, intrigue, and hypocrisy. So we're trying to aspire to not being hypocritical, to not being resorting to intrigue and subterfuge, and not resorting to corruption. Although, albeit, we see that the kings at the time, and as there is so much, there's great descriptions of the kings. Even in Lord Ramachandra's time, he had so many spies. He had so many. He had a huge network of people, in all walks of life. It's not that he's some sort of walkover, but he's very concerned about how to keep the status quo of the state going. So therefore, he's very aware of, political intrigue. And it says, how he can keep tabs on upstarts. Isn't that what we read about earlier? He was able to keep the upstarts in check. He was fear personified to the upstarts. So who are the upstarts? If you look at any system, like you look in the Russian system at the moment, the leader is calling the opposition an upstart, and they're putting him in Siberia apparently next, and this is the whole corruption that goes on instead of, whereas the policy itself is not wrong from a leader to be continuously protecting the information, the guidance that he gets from the brahmanas, because upstarts are trying to tamper with it or upset it. But at the same time, it becomes corrupt if the person themselves, who's the leader, is doing it from the wrong motivation. But we are trying to present and to implement Srila Prabhupada's instructions and to become fully... and Prabhupada didn't think it was going to be easy. Like Prabhupada was here, like he's talking about the ideal system of the monarchy, and then he's talking about the what's going on today. It's not a shoe-in. It's not easy to even to keep this institution going once I'm left, But he set up different systems where he tried to do that, and succeeded to a large extent. Okay, so I've got, that's the purport, the verse and purport for today. I hope if there was anybody listening, that they appreciated or enjoyed it. I'm personally getting the benefit of speaking on the Bhagavatam, whether people are listening or not. And I also have the inner satisfaction that somehow or other I'm doing a little bit, tiny, to try to maintain this Bhagavatam as being central to our to an existence, to my existence anyway, but to spread it as much as I possibly can. So I hope you do very well in your attempts at liberation from birth and death, and I hope for some blessings that I may also follow in your footsteps, or in the footsteps of the Acharyas. Srimad-Bhagavatam.